You are now listening to Mark's Unexplained World by Mark the Medium. Available on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Prime, Podbean, and most other podcast platforms. Tonight's episode is about the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders. So it's over to you now, Mark, to do your best.
The Oklahoma Girl Scout murders took place on the morning of the 13th of June 1977 at Camp Scott in Mayes County, Oklahoma, in the United States. The victims were three Girl Scouts named Lori Lee Farmer, Michelle Heather Goose and Doris Denise Milner, whose ages were between 8 and 10 years old. All three girls were victims of both rape and murder. Their bodies were then left on a trail leading to the campsite showers, which was approximately 150 yards or 140 metres away from their tent. Less than 2 months before the murders, during an on-site training session, a counsellor at Camp Scott discovered that her belongings had been ransacked and her doughnuts had been stolen. And inside the empty doughnut box was a handwritten note stating in capital letters, and I quote, "We are on a mission to kill 3 girls in one tent." However, the director of Camp Scott, upon seeing the note, decided that it was probably just a prank, and so consequently he ignored it. The case was classified as solved when a local jail escapee called Gene Leroy Hart, who also had a history of rape and violence, was arrested. However, Gene Leroy Hart was acquitted on the March of 1979 after a jury unanimously returned a verdict of not guilty. The case is, still to this day, remaining officially unsolved. Greetings, Unexplainers. Thank you for tuning in once again and listening to this unsolved episode of Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I'm a psychic medium, a ufologist and a true crime buff. And just to give you a better idea of who I am and what I do, every Monday night I do a podcast on the various subjects that fall under the unexplained banner. These include ufology, hauntings, disasters, both natural and unnatural, and all sorts of paranormal phenomena, including true crime, unsolved crime, and missing people. So if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about the dark story surrounding the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders. And this week's necessary disclaimer: this story is a tale that sadly involves details of a triple homicide, mainly with young children, so may prove upsetting to some. You listen, of course, at your own discretion. Also, all opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts of the case remain true. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, it is probably not the most English of English. Anyway, let's get back to the story at hand. According to Wikipedia, Mayes County is a county located in the northeast of the US state of Oklahoma, and as of the 2020 census, the population of the area was 39,046. It is named after Samuel Houston Mays, who was the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation from 1895 to 1899, with its county seat being Pryor Creek. The first Boy Scout troop in America is claimed to have been organised in Pawhuska, which is a Cherokee area council in Oklahoma, in the May of 1909 by the English Reverend John F. Mitchell, with scouting in Oklahoma itself having a long history from the 1910s to the present day. It has served thousands of youths and young people in programmes that are dedicated to suit the environment in which they live. Today there are 8 Boy Scouts of America, or BSA, local councils based in or providing services within the state of Oklahoma. The Boy Scouts of America's Cherokee Area Council maintain an office in Bartsville, Oklahoma, and serves both the youth and their families. The Cherokee Area Council provides a web presence for its membership and other interested persons. Communities served by the council include Pawhuska, Bartsville, Nowata, Veneta, Grove, Miami, and many others in just 6 northeastern counties of Oklahoma. There are also 5 Girl Scout councils in Oklahoma. The Girl Scouts of Eastern Oklahoma serves up to 15,000 girls as opposed to 20,000 boys and adult volunteers in 30 eastern Oklahoma counties. The first Girl Scout troop was in Tulsa in 1917, with the first council starting up in 1923. And on a small bit of trivia, the earliest known sale of Girl Scout cookies by an individual in the United States was by the Mistletoe Troop in Muskogee, Oklahoma, in the December of 1917. There, don't you feel better for knowing all that? I do. Camp Scott first opened its door. Camp Scott first opened its doors on the 11th of August 1928, although some sources do give the date as 1918, but I'll let you decide. It was originally called Camp Mardelco, which ran for just a 2-week period, then changed its name to Camp Scott. The camp itself sits on a 240-acre site, which is still owned by the Tulsa Scout Council. In total, there were at least 20 buildings on the property, which were all fitted with running water and plumbing. The camp included a variety of scouting activities, which included things like swimming, CPR training, nature study, and leadership skills. Over the next few decades, Camp Scott held a variety of events, which included stuff like a Rancho Festival, a water carnival, and even the Oklahoma Academy of Science annual meeting. And at one point, back in 1947, it even held a state conference, and 10 years later, in 1957, the camp's attendance reached up to 4,606 Girl Scouts. Coming forward a bit more to the year of 1977, and it was also the year that Camp Scott would be celebrating its 49th year as a keystone of the Tulsa-based Magic Empire Girl Scout Council. But all these types of celebrations came to a full stop when tragedy struck. The young victims of the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders at Camp Scott were Lori Lee Farmer, aged 8, Doris Denise Milner, aged 10, and Michelle Heather Goose, aged 9. In the April of 1977, just 2 months before the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders took place, during a training session for camp counsellors at Camp Scott, one of the counsellors discovered that her belongings had been ransacked and that her donuts had been stolen. However, things took a sinister turn when the said counsellor found inside her empty donut box a handwritten note that said in large capital letters, and I quote,
"We are on a mission to kill 3 girls in one tent."
Then things took an even darker, sinister turn when the aforementioned counsellor also noticed that someone had created an effigy of a man which was hanging from a tree by its neck. On an interesting side note, an effigy is a sculptural representation, often life-size, of a specific person or a prototypical figure. The term is mostly used for the makeshift dummies used for symbolic punishment in political protests and for the figures burned in certain traditions around New Year, Carnival, Halloween and Easter. In European cultures, effigies were used in the past for punishment in formal justice when the perpetrator could not be apprehended, and in the popular justice practices of social shaming and exclusion. Additionally, an effigy is used for certain traditional forms of sculpture, namely tomb effigies, funeral effigies and coin effigies. While both the effigy hanging from a tree and the note found in the empty donut box were strange and upsetting, the director of the camp session treated the note as a prank and discarded the whole affair.
Why did he do that then?
Well, you may well ask. It appears that in the letter, as well as mentioning the threat of murder, the author of the note also talked about Martians, thus losing any credibility.
Oh, I see.
After this first short break, in part 2, we will look at the night of the murders and the discovery of the 3 bodies at Camp Scott the next day.
This show is brought to you courtesy of Neil Packer and the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre. Find them online at www.hauntedresearchcentre.com or at 9 to 11 Regent Street, Hinckley, LE10 1AW. Open on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for guided tours of the haunted rooms at just £3 per person. Booking is essential at all times, and over 16s only, please, unless accompanied by an adult. The haunted rooms are extremely haunted, and paranormal activity could and has taken place at any time. Some areas and particular objects or items can be quite scary and unnerving. Membership is available for £25 to qualify for selective offers. And why not download the app, available on both iOS and Android for only $3.99, to keep up to date with what is coming up at the centre.
Thanks for listening to Mark's Unexplained World. If you are interested in parapsychology, quantum sciences, and true encounters with the other side, you may wish to visit The Weird Walk Home. That's my show on YouTube. Also, stay tuned, because After Dark with Tilly and Mark is creeping your way in June. Additionally, if you are interested in weird sciences, you may like to purchase my brand new book on Amazon. That would be Weird Time by Tim R. Swartz. It features lots of strange explanations and encounters with time from myself and other notable names like Lon Strickler and more. Thanks for listening.
On the 12th of June 1977, at around 7 p.m, the three Girl Scouts, Laurie Farmer, Michelle Goose and Doris Milner, arrived for the Girl Scout camp at Camp Scott in Mays County, Oklahoma. It was a bit of a stormy night that evening, so the three girls sought shelter from the thunderstorm in a tent marked number 8, also known as Camp Kiowa. The tents where the Girl Scouts stayed were fanned out around the councillor's quarters so as she could keep a better eye on the girls. However, tent number 8, where the three girls had set up camp for the trip, was the one furthest away from the councillor's quarters, so unfortunately it was almost impossible to see it at night, as it was also partially blocked by the camp's showers. I should point out here that some sources claim the tent the three girls were staying in was number 7 and some claim it was number 8, but for the sake of this podcast I will stick with number 8. The three girls were all residents of Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, which was a suburb of Tulsa. On an interesting side note, Broken Arrow is a city in the Tulsa and Wagoner counties in the US state of Oklahoma. It is the largest suburb of Tulsa, and according to the 2020 census, Broken Arrow has a population of 113,540 residents and is the 4th most populous city in the state of Oklahoma. The Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad sold lots for the town's site in 1902, and company secretary William S. Fears named it Broken Arrow after the Creek Native Americans had been forced to relocate from Alabama to Oklahoma along the Trail of Tears, where 60,000 Native Americans were forced to leave their homes. Although Broken Arrow was originally an agricultural community, its current economy is very diverse, with the city having the 3rd largest concentration of manufacturers in the state. The next morning, on the 13th of June, at around 6 a.m, a camp counsellor named Carla Wilhite, while on her way to the shower camp block, saw a girl's body in a sleeping bag in a wooded space just outside the tent area. And on closer inspection of the area, Carla Wilhite also discovered that all three girls from tent number 8 were in fact missing. So, after this discovery, an immediate search was instigated by the camp counsellors, and soon they discovered the lifeless bodies of the other 2 girls, which had been left on a trail leading to the showers, which was about 150 yards away from their tent, near the main road. All 3 girls, Laurie Farmer, Michelle Goose and Doris Milner, were found stuffed into the bottom of their own sleeping bags. So it was at this point that the camp counsellors began to realise that all 3 girls had actually been murdered. Subsequent testing showed that all 3 girls had been sexually assaulted, raped and beaten, with Laurie Farmer and Michelle Goose found to be bludgeoned to death and Doris Milner having been strangled. On top of the girls' bodies was found to be a large red flashlight with a smudged fingerprint on the lens, but unfortunately it has never been identified due to it being too smudged or degraded for a positive identification. Also, found in some blood inside the girl's tent was a footprint from a UK 9.5 size shoe. According to police reports, in the early morning hours of the 13th of June, between the hours of 2:30 and 3 a.m, a landowner reported hearing quite a bit of traffic on a remote road near the camp itself. And approximately 30 minutes later, another Girl Scout camper in another tent was awoken when she heard someone with a flashlight open a flap to a tent. But not only that, at 3 a.m. the same morning, another Girl Scout on the same site claimed that she heard a scream come from the section of camp where tent number 8 was located. And at the same time, one of the other campers said she heard a scream followed by someone crying, and I quote,
"Mama! Mama!"
As both Girl Scouts were unsure of what to do, they just went back to sleep. During the police's initial search of Camp Scott, that was nearly 400 acres in size, they came across some duct tape, a rope, another flashlight, and a pair of women's eyeglasses. A couple of things that the police did note about the flashlight was that it had a newspaper stuffed inside it to stop the batteries from rattling, and that it had some tape over the lens to dull the beam down a bit. What was also noted by law enforcement is that both the duct tape and rope that was located around the campsite matched the kind that were used on the 3 Girl Scouts. As the police search expanded around the 400-acre area, they found more duct tape, along with groceries, photographs, and a newspaper that was from the same issue that was found inside the flashlight in a nearby cave. And outside the cave, they found a crowbar, along with several empty bottles of beer. And as if that wasn't enough evidence that the murderer had taken up residence in the cave, the words, and I quote,
"The killer was here, bye-bye fools,"
with the date 77/6/17 written next to it on the cave wall. After the 3 girls, Laurie Farmer, Michelle Goose and Doris Milner, were murdered, the police suspicions were laid at the feet of 33-year-old Gene Leroy Hart of committing the crimes.
So who was Gene Leroy Hart?
Well, Gene Leroy Hart was a local man of the Cherokee Nation and a high school football star who had been raised a mile away from the actual murder scene at Camp Scott. At the time of the murders, he was a prison escapee with a violent past who had been originally sentenced to 308 years in prison for kidnapping and raping 2 pregnant women, as well as 4 counts of first-degree burglary. In 1973, he had escaped from Mays County Jail and remained on the run for several years. But after an extensive manhunt and a tip-off that led the police to a cabin in Cherokee County, Gene Leroy Hart was rearrested on the 6th of April 1978, which was 10 months after the murders of the 3 Girl Scouts at Camp Scott. The police firmly believed Gene Leroy Hart to have been in the area when the Girl Scout murders took place. And not only that, but he was also named as a suspect after a photograph of a woman that was found in the cave near Camp Scott was traced back to him. After this second short break, in part 3, we will look at the trial verdict of Gene Leroy Hart and where he is today, and some of the legal actions taken from the three girls' parents.
Fright Nights was established in 1999 as the first company in the world to offer overnight ghost hunt experiences to the general public, pioneering paranormal events since the last century. Fright Nights operate at hundreds of the UK's most haunted and exclusive venues. All events have their own team of experienced paranormal investigators, mediums and psychics. They have a VIP members club for regular returning guests, offering loyalty discounts and exclusive invitation-only events. They can also host private events for your family and friends. You can contact them on 07852 998 628 or email them at office@frightnights.co.uk, or take a look at their website at www.frightnights.co.uk, where you can see the many locations they investigate and learn about them and the opportunities they have available. Hundreds of ghost hunters join Fright Nights every month for the most thrilling ghost hunting experiences they'll never forget. If you haven't been on a ghost hunt before, then why not join them to see what it's all about? Why not visit their social media sites for up-to-date information on all the places they visit and to see what's coming up in the future? They look forward to seeing you all soon. Fright Nights Ghost Hunting Events. Remember, only the original will do.
Gene Leroy Hart was charged with the killings of the three young girls and stood trial after pleading his innocence. He was represented by an Oklahoma local attorney named Gavin A. Isaacs and was tried on the March of 1979. And although the local sheriff pronounced Gene Leroy Hart guilty by, and I quote, 1,000%, a local jury found Gene Leroy Hart not guilty of the three Girl Scout murders. This obviously didn't go down too well with the local population of Oklahoma and the immediate vicinity, with those who attempted to convict Gene Leroy Hart, meaning the local law enforcement of course, believing that the trial should have taken place outside of Mays County for what they believed would have been less biased. You see, Gene Leroy Hart was a member of the Cherokee Nation and therefore was well respected within his community, where he had been a high school athlete. However, as a convicted kidnapper, rapist, burglar and jail escapee, he did return to prison as he still had 305 years left of his 308 years sentence to serve in the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. On the 4th of June 1979, roughly 2 years after the Girl Scout murders, Gene Leroy Hart, at the age of 35, collapsed and died of a heart attack after about an hour's worth of weightlifting and jogging in the prison exercise yard. In 1989, DNA testing was conducted and showed 3 of the 5 probes matched Gene Leroy Hart's DNA. However, these DNA samples were officially marked as being inconclusive, as statistically DNA from 1 in 7,700 Native Americans would have obtained the same results. However, the DNA testing did rule out several other potential suspects that had been considered over the years. On an interesting side note, DNA, which stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, I think I got that right, is a self-replicating material that is present in nearly all living organisms as the main constituent of chromosomes and the carrier of genetic information. DNA profiling, also known as DNA fingerprinting and genetic fingerprinting, is the process of determining an individual's deoxyribonucleic acid for DNA characteristics. DNA profiling is a forensic technique in criminal investigations, comparing criminal suspects' profiles to DNA evidence to assess the likelihood of their involvement in the crime. It is also used in paternity testing to establish immigration eligibility and in genealogical and medical research. DNA profiling has also been used in the study of animal and plant populations in the field of zoology, botany and agriculture. Fast forward about 20 years, and in 2008 the authorities conducted new DNA testing on some stains found on a pillowcase that belonged to one of the girls. However, unfortunately, these results also proved to be inconclusive because the samples were, and I quote, too deteriorated to obtain a DNA profile. Or in other words, they were considered too degraded based on the technology available to them at the time. But the police in Oklahoma, as well as Lori Farmer's mother, Sherry Farmer, was confident that Gene Leroy Hart was the guilty party. Sherry Farmer also said that the new DNA evidence, and I quote,
gives us some peace, but certainly no closure.
Fast forward again by about 10 years, and in 2017, donations of about $30,000 was raised by the local Mays County Sheriff in order that the authorities can do new DNA testing using the latest advances in DNA technology. And a couple of years later, in 2022, the authorities make it public that DNA evidence strongly suggests that Gene Leroy Hart was involved with the Girl Scout murders, with the sheriff, Mike Reed of Mays County, saying, and I quote, "Unless something new comes up, something brought to light that we are not aware of, I am convinced where I'm sitting of Hart's guilt and involvement in this case." Sheriff Mike Reed said that the results of the DNA tests had been known to him since 2019, but that he did not want to go public with the findings until he was asked to do so by the victims' families. And although there is no full DNA profile to conclusively say that Gene Leroy Hart was the Girl Scout murderer, DNA testing that was conducted, again later in 2022, strongly points to him. Soon after the bodies of Lori Farmer, Michelle Goose and Doris Milner were discovered, Camp Scott was evacuated and shut down. The rest of the Girl Scouts were not told why they had to leave the camp, and the parents of the surviving children, who were all waiting patiently at the Tulsa bus depot, didn't know whether their daughters were dead or alive. Well, not until 2:15 p.m, when all the girls arrived back safely. A few years later, two of the families of the murdered children sued the Magic Empire Council and its insurer for the sum of $5 million, alleging negligence. The civil trial included a discussion regarding the aforementioned threatening note that was thought to have been left by the murderer, and the fact that the tent number 8 was at least 86 yards or 79 metres away from the councillor's tent. However, 9-3 vote by the jurors decided in favour of Magic Empire. Richard Goose, who was the father of one of the victims, Michelle Goose, helped to establish the Victims' Bill of Rights in Oklahoma, as well as the Oklahoma Victims' Compensation Board. Richard Goose said that he felt as though he and his wife were ignored by law enforcement and prosecutors, meaning throughout the case, of course, so he drafted the bill to help coordinate centres in Oklahoma to keep victims and families involved in every step of the legal process. The Oklahoma Victims' Compensation Board also helps to provide victims and their family members with money to help assist with expenses like medical bills. And the mother of Lori Farmer, named Sherry Farmer, founded the Oklahoma chapter of Parents of Murdered Children, which is an organisation dedicated to providing assistance and support to the families of young homicide victims. In 2021, the Supreme Court determined that crimes involving Cherokee natives on Cherokee land in Oklahoma fell under tribal law rather than state sovereignty, and so any new details about the murders are being investigated by the Cherokee Nation. Writer and citizen of the Cherokee Nation, Faith Phillips, stated that she had obtained a written confession to the killings from a Cherokee native, and so, as of the July 2023, the case is now under new investigation, since it has not been closed by the FBI. The three Girl Scouts had only known each other for less than a day before they were murdered. And during that day, the three girls had participated in all the fun and activities that Camp Scott had to offer. One of the things that really pulled at my heartstrings was when I saw that 8-year-old Lori Farmer had written a letter home to say that Michelle Goose and Denise Milner were her new best friends. And from what I can see, on the night of the murders, there should have been a fourth girl who was meant to have stayed in the tent with them that night. However, she wasn't scheduled to arrive until the following day. The Oklahoma Girl Scouts sold Camp Scott, which was originally opened in 1928, in the 1980s to a local family. Camp Scott to this day remains closed. However, the site is frequently visited by ghost hunters and paranormal investigators who claim the 3 murdered Girl Scouts haunt the area. To this day, no one has ever been officially convicted of the murders of 8-year-old Lori Farmer, 9-year-old Michelle Goose and 10-year-old Denise Milner. Girls, may you continue to rest in peace.
Thank you all for taking the time out to listen to this episode of Mark's Unexplained World. In our next episode, show number 113, we are going to be looking at the disappearance of Natalie Holloway. The 18-year-old American high school graduate, Natalie Ann Holloway, disappeared on the 30th of May 2005 and was declared dead on the 12th of January 2012. Her disappearance resulted in an international media sensation, especially in the United States, from where she had vanished. The prime suspects was Dutch national Jordan van der Sloot, who was made conflicting statements over the years about his involvement, including a confession to killing her. Her remains to this day have still never been found.
This show was written and researched by myself, Mark Hughes, and proofread and edited by Linda Hughes. As usual, the pronunciations of that DNA name was all mine. The actors in this episode were Mark Hughes, Linda Hughes, Denise Poolar and Tilly Treadwell from the Weird Walk Home podcast. With special thanks to Neil Packer and the staff at the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley. And a big thank you to everyone for listening. We never run out of ideas here at the office for Mark's Unexplained World podcast. But if you know of any other intriguing stories under the Unexplained banner, including ufology, hauntings, disasters, and any other sort of paranormal phenomena, including true crime and unsolved crime and missing people, just drop me a direct message and I will see what I can do. I'll also include the name of the person who suggested the idea in the end credits of the podcast. And again, just to add, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. I thank you in advance. Mark's Unexplained World, because there's more to the paranormal than meets the third eye. And remember guys, keep it real, because being real is better than being perfect. This show and all its contents are covered by basic copyright of Mark the Medium.